Good evening to all. When Dr. Krishna sir put forth the idea of an orthopedic spouse to give a talk, I didn't think twice before giving Dr. Deepak's name. That's because we have been interacting and working together for several cases in the past 10 years of my practice. And very recently, a rheumatoid arthritis case that he had been dealing with for the past 4-5 years, which he promptly referred to me when she developed cough, was diagnosed as an early case of ILD, and she is doing well now. Our speaker today is Dr. Deepak S., Senior Orthopedic Consultant, Sanjeevani Cooperative Hospital, Hassan. He completed his MBBS from JSS Mysore, did his D.Orth from Adi Chunchandgiri Institute of Medical Science, went on to do DNB from Kovai Medical Center, Coimbatore, and then later a fellowship in joint replacement. His areas of interest are joint replacement and trauma. Sir, our question to you today is lungs and bones, are we together? The session is over to you.
As a part of the brilliant idea of interdisciplinary CME involving the spouses of CCI family, I am here representing the Department of Orthopedics. As a topic questions lungs and bones, are we together? I hope my talk answers this. Today, my talk is related to lung involvement in rheumatoid arthritis and ankylosing spondylitis, pulmonary embolism and fat embolism in orthopedic practice, and chest pain in non-traumatic cases of which presents to orthopedicians. As we know, rheumatoid arthritis, it's a systemic autoimmune inflammatory disease of diarthrodial joints or synovial joints, along with multi-organ involvement. So, the immune system loses its ability to recognize synovial tissues as their self-tissue and thus attacks the synovial tissue and causes inflammation and destruction of the joints. So, the pathology is, as I said, it's an autoimmune response, and the prevalence is very high in Indian population, about 0.5 to 1%, and female to male ratio is 4:1. The peak age of onset is 4th decade, slightly later in males. The mortality is 10 to 15 years earlier compared to the general population. The pathology, there are various genetic risk factors like susceptibility of HLA-DRB1 and non-genetic factors like female sex, smoking, ethnicity, all play a role in predisposing an individual to developing rheumatoid arthritis. So once a post-translational modification like citrullination happens, rheumatoid arthritis triggered. So autoantibody antibody formation such as anti-CCP and RA initiates an inflammatory process leading on to arthritis. The pathological stages are broadly classified as synovitis stage, then it leads on to pannus formation, and then fibrous ankylosis, and finally it is bony ankylosis. Rheumatoid factor is the most common autoantibody found in rheumatoid arthritis. It's detected in 70 to 80% of rheumatoid arthritis patients, though it does not have a predictive value for diagnosis because so many patients may have, or non-rheumatoid patients also may have rheumatoid factor. So it has only a good predictive value for outcome. Rheumatoid arthritis again is still a predominantly clinical based diagnosis rather than blood investigations. So clinical criteria based on American College of Rheumatology has almost 10 points. In that, majority is for the number of joint involvement, about 5 points for number of joint involvement. Serology has 1 point, serology has 3 points, and symptomatology has 1 point, and serology again CRP and ESR has 1 point each. So at least 6 out of 10 is needed for diagnosing rheumatoid arthritis. Systemic associated complaints are weakness, fatigue, malaise, fever, weight loss, and depression. These rheumatoid arthritis patients, apart from complaining of joints pain, they can always come with these general complaints also. 40% have extra articular involvement, and among this, the most common is lung involvement. which increases the morbidity and mortality 10 to 20%. And lung involvement occurs in the first 5 initial years of diagnosis. So once we diagnose rheumatoid arthritis, within the 5 years, lung involvement already occurs. Whether they're symptomatic or asymptomatic is another question. Extra-articular involvement of rheumatoid arthritis, almost all the structures apart from lung like eyes, skin, GI, neurology, vascular, cardiac, renal, musculoskeletal, all the systems are involved as usual in a multi-connective tissue disorders. All the systems are also involved. But when I went through the literature, because I had to do some research because this was related to pulmonologist and orthopedician talk. So there was a plethora of diseases. I had to literally go through in detail to find out how many pulmonary complications have been reported in rheumatoid arthritis. So it's like a Pandora's box. A wide plethora of lung involvement has been reported, ranging from pleural diseases to minute alveolar damages, which highlights how severe lung involvement can be there in a rheumatoid arthritis patient. So an orthopedist has to be really aware of the complications of rheumatoid, particularly in relation to lung involvement. So most of the studies of rheumatoid arthritis with complications involving lung are based on drug toxicity. They talk about methotrexate, sulfasalazine, or hydroxychloroquine-induced toxicity on lungs and associated infections. But actually, direct involvement of lung is more common in rheumatoid arthritis, wherein airways, parenchyma, vasculature, all the structures are involved. The associated secondary complications of rheumatoid arthritis due to pulmonary involvement can be opportunistic infections, tuberculosis, atypical mycobacteria, fungal infections, or cytomegalovirus pneumonitis, and also because of drug toxicity related to gold, methotrexate, and dipenicillamine. The main pathology is inflammation and fibrosis. Initially, because of the autoimmune response, inflammation sets in, as in the joint process, lungs also the inflammation process sets in. Once the fibroproliferative process starts, then the pathology is going to be irreversible. It leads on to fibrosis. So that's the reason early diagnosis of pulmonary involvement is crucial in managing these cases. So how do they present? Clinically, rheumatoid arthritis patients can present with varied symptoms. Pleural involvement causes chest pain and cough, whereas pulmonary vasculature involvement causes pulmonary hypertension, which is rare. They can present with shortness of breath, syncope, tiredness, chest pain, pedal edema, and tachycardia. Whereas in parenchymal involvement leads to rheumatoid arthritis nodules, pneumothorax, hydropneumothorax, and hemoptysis. So there is an entity wherein industrial workers have pneumoconiosis in combination with rheumatoid arthritis. It is called Kaplan syndrome. Coming to rheumatoid arthritis ILD, interstitial lung diseases, it's one of the most important lung involvement which increases the morbidity and mortality. The prevalence is reported to be 7%, whereas it is much higher. Though the prevalence is reported is 7%, it's much higher because many of them are asymptomatic and be picked up only by a CT scan. But that means it only implies that the more number of CT you do in these rheumatoid patients, you can pick up more lung involvement, but may not be ideal in all the cases. The patterns are either inflammatory, fibrosing, or a mixed pattern. Fibrosing variety of interstitial lung disease has a worse prognosis. So how do we know which patient is going to be having more pulmonary complications and ILD? So in men, RA-ILD is reportedly commoner. Smoking increases the risk of ILD, as well as smoking with a combination of HLB-DRB1 has a 21-fold increased risk of developing ILD. Also, the anti-CCP antibody titer also carries a high risk for extra-articular involvement, and studies have shown that in bronchoalveolar lavage shows high titers of anti-CCP antibodies in such patients. So clinical features of rheumatoid arthritis ILD patients. These patients present with cough, which can be productive or cough, hemoptysis, fever, pleuritic pain, dyspnea, exertional dyspnea, which can be a strong predictor for shortened survival of such patients, and wheezing. Investigations, routine investigation, liver function and renal function test, all these are for monitoring the drug toxicity and response. And CRP-ESR is for disease monitoring progression, whether to say whether the disease has increased or decreased. Based on CRP and ESR, we titrate the dose. Radiology, again, chest X-ray and CT are needed to assess the lung involvement, and ophthalmical examination is for knowing the drug toxicity, particularly hydroxychloroquine. Chest X-ray, to an orthopedician it may look naive, but on detailed examination you can see nodules, effusions, they can present with pleurisy, scarring, fibrosis, all the features can be there. But as I said earlier, nodules or early involvement shows nodular involvement which can be missed by a regular orthopedician. All the more reason any lung involvement of a patient has to be referred promptly to a pulmonologist. HRCT, which shows early involvement of the lung. Many asymptomatic patients can have lung changes, so it collectively shows the extent of lung damage caused by RA. It can show ground glass opacities, honeycombing, fibrosis. All these changes can be seen, particularly in later stages. So they can have hyperinflation pattern, bronchiectasis, fibrosis. All these can be picked by a HRCT. So pulmonary function test assesses the lung function, which helps in early evaluation of such patients. And once they are treated properly, they'll have better compliance to a treatment regimen. And also it increases the life expectancy. Coming to the treatment of rheumatoid arthritis, options range from NSAIDs, steroids to DMRDs and biologicals. Usually they start with NSAIDs and steroids, but severe stages and end stages require arthrodesis and joint replacement and reconstruction procedures. Topical injections are useful for flare-up of cases. Indications for disease-modifying drugs are if the patient has persistent symptoms and signs of inflammatory arthritis or evidence of progressive radiological damage, troublesome extraarticular manifestations, or recurrent rheumatoid arthritis. What are the advantages of starting DMRDs? It slows down the disease progression, improves the functional capacity of the patient, as well as reduces the pain, although the onset of its action is takes more than 3 weeks. So meanwhile, we have to add on NSAIDs and steroids before the action of DMRDs takes over. So the current treatment protocol is to start DMRDs as early as possible and with or without combination, because various DMRDs act at different levels of the immune system. And principle is to initiate with combination and slowly withdraw one by one depending on the response. The available drugs are conventional synthetic DMRDs earlier like hydroxychloroquine, methotrexate, and then we have biologicals which are target specific based on TNF alpha inhibitors like adalimumab, etanercept or infliximab, or anti-IL-6 like sarilumab and tocilizumab. According to the ACR guidelines, patients can be started on DMRDs based on the disease activity like low, moderate and high. Start DMRDs monotherapy in low and moderate, whereas in high you need to start earlier with a combination therapy. Biologicals are started once the response is not seen, and combination of DMRDs and biologicals are preferred in moderate and severe cases. So coming to rheumatoid arthritis induced interstitial lung disease, studies have shown that effective treatment of a joint disease per se may not be always considered adequate for controlling interstitial lung disease. However, interstitial lung disease can do respond to DMRDs, particularly newer biologicals. So like TNF alpha antagonist decreases the progression or slows down the progression of rheumatoid arthritis ILDs. Steroids and cyclosporin also have been found to be helpful. However, there is higher chances of infection with these cases. So early pulmonary referral when respiratory symptoms develop is the key to effectively manage such cases, and definitely they require continued regular pulmonary follow-up. Coming to ankylosing spondylitis, this is a chronic, progressive, painful, inflammatory rheumatic disease which mainly affects the spinal joints. It comes under seronegative arthritis. Mainly, predominantly the sacroiliac joints and the lumbar spine are commonly involved. Prevalence is about 7 to 9 per 10,000 population. Male commonly seen in males, 4 times commonly seen in males. It has a strong familial tendency. Cause is fairly unknown, but all these majority and at least 90% of these patients have HLA-B27 positivity. Broadly, seronegative arthritis can be classified as axial and peripheral. Axial is ankylosing spondylitis comes under axial arthritis, and psoriatic arthritis comes under peripheral arthritis. They have extra-articular involvement, and ankylosing spondylitis has HLA-B27 positivity. The pathology starts with inflammation around the axial skeleton with granulation tissue formation and gradually bone destruction. This is replaced by fibrous tissue which leads on to ossification and finally bony ankylosis. They present with insidious onset of backache and stiffness. A backache of more than 3 months is important to make a diagnosis, is one component for diagnosing ankylosing spondylitis. Earlier, they have slight loss of lumbar lordosis, limitation of extension of spine, and tenderness in the SI joint. Later, they have gross loss of lumbar lordosis and associated thoracic kyphosis. Advanced cases have completely ankylosed spine with no movement at all. The chest expansion is markedly reduced. Larger joints and hips and knees are involved in 30% of such cases. The extraskeletal features in ankylosing spondylitis are uveitis, conjunctivitis in 20% of cases. They also can present with inflammatory bowel disease such as Crohn's and ulcerative colitis. When the heart is involved, they can present with aortic valve disease and carditis. Lung involvement leads to pulmonary fibrosis, which is the most common finding in ankylosing spondylitis, ILD, as well as pneumothorax. When the genitourinary tract is involved, they can present with prostatitis. All the features are of seronegative arthritis. To make a diagnosis, earlier the ACR guidelines required sacroiliitis as a mandatory finding for diagnosis, but actually it was recognized that sacroiliitis in X-ray is a late finding. So we need to diagnose them earlier. So now the revised criteria is based on ASAS classification, that is assessment of ankylosing spondylitis, a group of experts, wherein which requires only one spondylitic feature as well as a sacroiliitis based on X-ray or MRI, or you need a HLA-B27 positive with more than 2 spondylitis features to make a diagnosis. So this leads to this helps in earlier identifying and diagnosing ankylosing spondylitis and treating them. The predominant finding on radiography is sacroiliitis, which starts on the iliac side first and leading on to ankylosis. The peripheral joints shows erosive arthritis and ankylosing in the later stages. As you said, on the left-hand side, the hallmark of sacroiliitis is sclerosis predominantly on the iliac side, joint surface irregularity, osteophyte formation, later leading on to complete fusion of the sacroiliac joint as seen on the right-hand side. Spine shows calcification of the anterior longitudinal ligament and posterior longitudinal ligament, leading to squaring of vertebra, then syndesmophyte formation, which bridges several levels, giving rise to bamboo spine or regular jersey spine appearance. Pulmonary involvement in ankylosing spondylitis shows upper lobe fibrosis, interstitial lung disease, ventilatory impairment due to chest wall restriction, sleep apnea, and spontaneous pneumothorax. Upper lobe fibrosis is the most common abnormality in ankylosing spondylitis. Cause is unknown, but while some of the studies or research says that recurrent aspiration leads to aspiration pneumonitis because of defective ventilation. Other cause mentioned is alterations in the apical mechanical stress due to rigid thoracic spine, or because of impaired cough secondary to alterations in the respiratory mechanisms per se. All this can lead to upper lobe fibrosis. Interstitial lung disease and ankylosing spondylitis. Parenchymal changes start within first 5 years after the diagnosis of ankylosing spondylitis, and parenchymal abnormalities leads to emphysema, bronchiectasis, ground glass opacities, septal thickening, parenchymal micronodules, pleural thickening, parenchymal bunch. Various findings are there as in an interstitial lung disease in ankylosing spondylitis. Chest wall restriction and ventilatory abnormalities are seen in ankylosing spondylitis due to dorsal kyphosis, fused costovertebral and sternoclavicular joints, which leads to impaired chest expansion. So in PFT, a restrictive pattern of lung function is seen. Spontaneous pneumothorax, however, is a rare complication and is usually secondary to ALD. Several mechanisms for sleep apnea are explained in ankylosing spondylitis, like the restriction of oropharyngeal airway, compression by cervical spine, involvement of the temporomandibular joint, a restrictive pulmonary disease, or compression of respiratory centers in the medulla. All these can cause sleep apnea in ankylosing spondylitis. HRCT reveals lung parenchymal abnormalities such as an ILD appearance, or it can show apical fibrosis or another associated infections, emphysema, all can be seen in ankylosing spondylitis. The primary goal of treating ankylosing spondylitis is to maximize health quality of life, prevent progression of structural damage, and preservation, normalization of functional and social participation of such patients. They usually require long-term NSAIDs and intermittent steroids. However, yoga, exercises, and patient education are the key factors for treating these patients. DMRDs such as sulfasalazine and biologicals such as TNF-alpha inhibitors and IL-17 inhibitors, secukinumab, have shown beneficial results. However, the interleukin-17 inhibitor, secukinumab, has been shown to have excellent response to ankylosing spondylitis patients. Treatment for spondylitis arthritis with IL-7, I told you, has shown promising results. Broadly, once the classification of axial and peripheral has been made based on the disease severity, either we start with NSAIDs. NSAIDs are required for long-term. Unlike in rheumatoid arthritis, we have to taper off NSAIDs, but ankylosing spondylitis patients may require NSAIDs for longer time, and steroids are for pulse dosage in between when the disease flare-up is there. But biologicals do respond, patients respond very well with biologicals such as IL-17 inhibitors. Next, coming to pulmonary embolism, incidence of DVT without prophylaxis is around 40 to 80% in total knee replacement patients and 39 to 74% in total hip replacement patients. Arthroplasty carries the highest risk of thromboembolic disease of all orthopedic procedures. Long bone fractures, arthroscopy, spine surgeries, all these carry high risk for pulmonary embolism. Incidence of pulmonary embolism in these is around 12%, which is asymptomatic. Our fatal pulmonary embolism ranges from 0.19 to 3.4%. The basic pathology in such cases is the classic Burko's triad, which involves blood stasis, vascular injury, and hypercoagulability. Other causes for pulmonary embolism are malignancy, heart failure, pregnancy, postpartum status, obesity, smoking, coagulopathy, oral contraceptives. All these also can cause pulmonary embolism. Symptoms range from tachycardia, cough, low oxygen saturation, shortness of breath, hemoptysis, confusion, nausea, dizziness, all that. The classic triad of shortness of breath, chest pain, and hemoptysis, which is around 5 to 7%, is rarely seen in the clinical scenario. So how do we know which patients are prone for pulmonary embolism? Patients who have previous history of DVT and pulmonary embolism are high risk, and patients having higher BMI more than 30 and are also at risk for pulmonary embolism. However, patients' symptoms are related to the pulmonary reserve of these patients. Clinical presentations are unreliable. Imaging modalities are the most effective way of diagnosing pulmonary embolism. Investigations available are ventilation perfusion scans, HRCT, which has a specificity of 81 to 100%. CT angiography is the investigation of choice, and D-dimer is very useful is a very useful parameter, and ECG and echo are also helpful in diagnosing such cases. There is a modified Wells criteria which is used to determine pulmonary embolism and is very useful for treatment planning also. X-ray shows the classical X-rays which shows the classical Hampton sum, which is a triangular pleural-based infiltrate with apex towards the hilum, or the Westermarck sign, which is dilatation of the pulmonary artery proximal to the embolus and collapse of the distal vessel. Which is usually, these are all in the ideal scenario, which may not be always seen in X-ray. That is why HRCT or CT angiogram is the investigation of choice for diagnosing such cases. Here we can see a CT angiogram on the right hand side showing a filling defect and ground glass opacity on the left hand side based on a CT. Based on the clinical parameters and assisted by D-dimer and CT angio, categorization of patients are done to start anticoagulant therapy. And the treatment includes thrombolytics, anticoagulants, oxygen supplementation, antibiotics, embolectomy, and surgical interventions like embolectomy and IVC filters. IVC filters are a prophylactic way of preventing pulmonary embolism, where we look for high-risk patients and they are prophylactically put on IVC filters before proceeding on to a surgical procedure. Coming to fat embolism in orthopedics, 90% of all trauma cases have some degree of fat embolism which embolizes into the circulation. However, fat embolism syndrome is seen in only 2 to 5% of such cases. This occurs within the first 24 hours of a trauma event. Predominantly 3 systems are involved: skin, lungs, and CNS. The causes are, as I said, trauma, a joint reconstruction, liposuction, parental infusions such as albumin, and decompression sickness. Features occur within 24 to 36 hours of an event. As I said, when the skin is involved, patients have petechia which is non-palpable, particularly seen in the upper torso, predominantly in the axillary region. You can have subconjunctival hemorrhages. When the lung is involved, you can present with dyspnea, tachypnea, and hypoxia. When the CNS system is involved, you can present with confusion, delirium, seizures, and coma. Gould-Wilson criteria helps in establishing the diagnosis. We require 1 major and 4 minor criteria for diagnosing these cases. So, in major criteria, it relates to skin condition or CNS or respiratory. These are the 3 major criteria. Either one of these systems, and rest of the any 4 minor criteria are needed for diagnosing fat embolism syndrome. Workup includes blood investigations which shows low hemoglobin and platelets, hypofibrinogenemia. Urine shows fat globules. Chest X-ray shows diffuse pulmonary infiltrates, and CT shows parenchymal changes and ARDS pictures. A nodular ground glass opacity in a trauma setting is highly suggestive of fat embolism. Pulmonary artery wedge catheter, when put during a procedure, can show fat emboli being thrown up into the circulation. Treatment includes fluids, crystalloids, and colloids to build up the volume. However, one has to be careful not to overload, and in such cases, diuretics may also have to be used. Adequate oxygen has to be mentioned. Oxygenation has to be maintained. Blood may have to be transfused when the hemoglobin is low. DVT prophylaxis has to be started in these cases. Steroids are very helpful in these cases. Early fracture stabilization is very useful to prevent fat embolism. And reaming procedures in orthopedics have fluted, reamers with suction. All these also minimize the risk of fat embolism. In an orthopedic scenario, or when the patient presents with chest pain, common orthopedic causes of chest pain can be a herniated disc. A cervical disc prolapse can also present with upper chest wall pain, an intercostal neuralgia, costochondritis, or osteomyelitis operations, commonly because of typhoid or tuberculosis, or less common causes of such as arthritis of the shoulder osteoporotic vertebral fractures, and bone tumors all can present as chest pain. Commonest one is costochondritis, which is inflammation of the costochondral junction of ribs or costosternal joints of the anterior chest wall. It is often confused with Heat syndrome, which is costochondritis of the second rib, usually on unilateral and associated with swelling. Here in costochondritis, any costochondral junctions 2 to 5 can be involved. Usually it is unilateral. It has a preceding history of cough or strenuous exercises, and it's a sharp pain which is exacerbated by movement or deep breathing and exertion. The non-orthopedic cause of chest pain can be because of skin involvement such as herpes zoster. So one has to be careful when a case presents with chest pain. In the first 2 to 3 days, they may not have any lesion and it can be simply treated as intercostal strain. So after 3 to 4 days, they can start developing rashes along the nerve distribution. So one has to be aware of possibility of herpes zoster. Pleuritic causes like pleurisy and pleural effusion also can present with chest pain. Lung infections, tumors, lung infections and tumors also can present with sharp chest pain. Cardiac causes and mediastinal pathology all can present to an orthopedician as chest pain. So one has to be aware of all these other causes which can cause chest pain, and one has to keep an open mind to look for such cases and promptly refer to them to the respective specialties. So to summarize, inflammatory arthritis has wide and extensive pulmonary involvement. Early pulmonary referral is warranted to prevent morbidity and mortality. Pulmonary embolism needs multidisciplinary approach, and non-orthopedic causes of chest pain has to be considered in day-to-day practice. So I finally thank Dr. N.H. Krishna, the founder chairman, and Dr. Narayan Pradeep for giving this valuable opportunity to interact with pulmonologists across India. I thank Dr. Narendra, National President, CCI, Dr. Ravi Doshi, CCI National Secretary, Dr. Vijay Kumar, CCI Webinar Coordinator, CIPLA for the technical support. Finally, I thank the moderator, my wife, Dr. Deepti, for her able support. Thank you all for your patient listening.
Thank you so much for that informative talk, sir. It seems to have bridged the gap between lungs and bones, or should I say pulmonologists and orthopedicians. So moving on to our question answer session. So there is a question from Dr. Praveen Bhatt from South Goa, who asks, what is the significance of HLA-B27 positivity?
In seronegative arthritis, like Reiter's, ankylosing psoriatic, and enteropathic, many of them can have HLA-B27 positivity because it's a group of disorders. That is the reason I said all these can cause spondyloarthritis. So spondyloarthritis is broadly classified as peripheral and axial. Both can have HLA-B27 positivity. That's all. It doesn't show that HLA-B27 patients may not always be diagnosed as ankylosing spondylitis. That is the reason it's only one of the criteria for diagnosing ankylosing spondylitis. So once a patient has HLA-B27 positivity, doesn't mean that he is a case of ankylosing spondylitis. There's only one criteria for it.
So coming to the next question, some questions related to COVID and asthma have been skipped as it's not relevant to the topic. But moving on, there is a question, orthopedic question. What are the causes of frozen shoulder and its treatment? It's coming from Dr. Chandra Mohan from Karnal.
Frozen shoulder is an end-stage diagnosis for periarthritis. The presentation is usually what is called as periarthritis. Periarthritis reasons are usually, most commonly we see periarthritis in diabetics, post-cardiac diseases, stenting procedures, or in traumas. Any of these can cause inflammation around the rotator cuff, usually the supraspinatus. When the inflammation sets in, patient has pain, associated stiffness, slowly there is adhesions all around the rotator cuff. Then there is decreased movements. Progressively, there is complete loss of motion. And that is the final stage called frozen shoulder. So periarthritis starts with pain, inflammation, freezing, or next stage is frozen. Final stage is thawing. It's a self-limiting disorder, but usually the patients are so symptomatic that it needs some kind of intervention.
Another question. This is coming from Mr. Prasoon Chatterjee from Mirpur. It says, please enlighten regarding steroid and osteoporosis.
That's an entirely exhaustive talk. I don't know whether it can be. I have used 32 minutes and I thought it's a huge talk. I would have been boring everybody. So steroids and osteoporosis are an entirely different talk to be talked to, I think.
So what is the precision of lung cancer? That is the question coming from Dr. Jiban Datta.
Pardon?
Okay, management of osteochondritis if not controlled by NSAID and if no other cause has been found. It is coming from Mr. Saumitra Mondal from Kolkata.
Yeah. Costochondritis is a rule of exclusion. That means after we exclude all the sinister causes, I said non-orthopedic causes of chest pain. That's the reason I said any patient who comes with anterior chest wall pain, we try to rule out all the other causes like cardiac and mediastinal pathologies. So ideally a CT is done. Most of the time costochondritis, a CT is normal. Then we diagnose it as costochondritis. It's an idiopathic condition. So once we treat with NSAIDs, the patient usually with NSAIDs, a short course of steroids gives excellent results. Most of the cases do well with steroids. Even then, if it's not relieved, intralesional steroid injection is very beneficial in these cases.
So another question, this is coming from Mr. Tridip Chatterjee from Mumbai. It says, doing an alkaline phosphatase, which if elevated and bone fraction is more, can it indicate bone involvement or lung pathology like bony mets in CA?
Alkaline phosphatase is also comes under almost like an acute phase reactant. So it can be elevated in many of the conditions. So it's not diagnostic of anything per se. If there is a clinical suspicion of a orthopedic condition, it only adds to the diagnostic value. That's all. There is nothing else. In osteoporosis, alkaline phosphatase usually is not raised. Any malignant condition, inflammatory condition, trauma conditions increases alkaline phosphatase, not in osteoporosis.
So another question from Dr. Karthik from Krishnagiri. Should asymptomatic pulmonary nodule in rheumatoid arthritis in females, does it need to be addressed?
Sorry, come again.
Any asymptomatic pulmonary nodule in rheumatoid arthritis in females, does it need to be addressed?
As I said, most of the lung findings, which we say, it can be picked up early if you do an HRCT. I mentioned that it is asymptomatic patients. So we don't know how many cases have lung involvement. As I said, it's within 5 years, lung involvement is there. Whether it is symptomatic or it's going to affect the patient, we don't know. It can be a starting stage of an ILD. So these cases needs to be monitored regularly. That's all. So just finding an RA nodule, I don't know, probably pulmonologists should be enlightening us more. RA nodules as such in a chest X-ray, probably we are not aware of it much.
Another question coming from Mr. Pradeepta Mahapatra. He's asking inflammatory cytokines causing damage to lung in inflammatory arthritis. What are they and what is the strategy to prevent lung damage in the long run? Should antibiotic be incorporated early in management?
Hello.
Sir, your video is stuck. You're audible, sir. You can
Hello, am I audible?
Yeah.
I had a connection problem. Can you please repeat the question again?
Yeah,
Sorry.
the question was inflammatory cytokine causing damage to the lung in inflammatory arthritis. What are they, and what is the strategy to prevent lung damage in the long run? Should antibiotic be incorporated early in the management?
Inflammatory markers are used for diagnosing. One of the diagnostic markers are inflammatory markers. I said DMRDs. The conventional synthetic DMRDs are methotrexate, hydroxychloroquine, all that. Now the newer biologicals, as I said, the newer biologicals are target specific. They target the specific inflammatory marker. As I said, TNF alpha inhibitors. TNF alpha inhibitors like adalimumab or etanercept, infliximab, all these are target specific DMRDs. The other one is anti-IL-6 inhibitor, that is sarilumab and tocilizumab. These are very much target specific DMRDs. So apart from rheumatoid arthritis, all the lung damage patients or lung involved patients also are known to improve with the biologicals.
Sir, I think that's all. Some are unrelated to the topic. Okay, sir, a personal question from my side. What is the most common cause of non-orthopedic chest pain that you have found?
Mostly we have seen intercostal sprains and strains, what we say, because of lifting weights or injuries. So they come with acute chest pains. And in fact, I have missed one or two cases of herpes zoster. So they usually come with, particularly in ladies, they come with pain on the side of the pain which radiates down. So sometimes because of the crowd or anything, time management, we try to give them some analgesics, send them off. After 4 or 5 days, luckily some have returned to me, and that's how I have found out herpes zoster lesion. So I mentioned that in that thing. So otherwise, costochondritis is one of the commonest reason they come with particular chest pains.
So we have another question from Dr. Vijay Kumar. He's asking how to manage flail chest. Flail chest
based on the symptoms. Flail chest need not be always have we need not intervene in all cases. Flail chest with acute respiratory distress may need surgical interventions. So usually they may have an ICD, and positive pressure ventilations are managed. Open injuries can be surgically managed, otherwise they are conservatively managed.
So do you believe in strapping rib fractures? Because
No,
many
ideally
of them...
I don't. Many of the cases I don't do constrictive kind of things. I only give analgesics and minder for their psychological benefit. I do a Dynaplast partial adhesions or belladonna kind of plasters. Otherwise, rib binders, I don't do that.
Another question coming from Dr. Tridip Chatterjee from Mumbai. As a pulmonologist, when do we refer a patient to a rheumatologist or an orthopedician in RA?
And why do they come to a pulmonologist first of all?
No, suppose they do come.
Pardon?
Suppose they come late in management. They come with lung involvement first, and then.
No, the rheumatoid arthritis is an orthopedic diagnosis. So secondary lung involvement. Usually they don't present to pulmonologists with lung condition. Rheumatoid arthritis is particularly a condition related to orthopedics, and then the lung involvement is secondary to rheumatoid arthritis. So in case the question is, if rheumatoid arthritis comes to you, definitely based on the blood parameters, depending on the disease activity, we start them on DMRDs. Ideally, I said DMRDs have to be started as early as possible in all cases of rheumatoid arthritis.
Another question coming from Ms. Shubha in Bengaluru. What about intercostal neuralgia?
Yeah.
So she
Intercostal
wants
neuralgia.
probably to highlight on that.
No, intercostal neuralgia, as I said, it's a same radiating pain coming from the dorsal vertebra all along a particular nerve road. So usually it can be the alternative diagnosis is intercostal strain, muscular strain because of sudden onset of cough, bouts of cough, or lifting weights or anything. Intercostal sprains can be mimicking an intercostal neuralgia. Other one is herpes zoster, which gives rise to typical intercostal neuralgias, or it can be because of any osteoporotic fractures or pathological fractures of the dorsal vertebra. These can also give rise to pain, which radiates from the affected vertebra all along the nerve root anteriorly.
So another question from Dr. Ajay, Nagpur. Any viral infection for costochondritis? How common is it in your practice?
Not much, because costochondritis, as I said, it's a diagnosis which we say it is idiopathic. No particular reason is known. If there is a particular reason for a costochondritis, it usually treat the cause. Costochondritis, we said it's an idiopathic cause, not because of virus. I've not seen that much. Not much.
Another question coming from Dr. Dinesh Ghaziabad. Are biologics and biosimilars equal in efficiency?
I didn't get what is biosimilars. I'm not clear about what is biosimilars.
Okay. Another question
Probably
coming.
if he's saying biosimilars, if it's DMRDs, conventional synthetic DMRDs, it can be said as this thing. Otherwise, targeted synthetic DMRDs, that can be said as biosimilars or baricitinib and tofacitinib. They are biosimilars.
Okay. Another question coming from Muniza Puducherry. Sir, how to manage rib erosion in case of lung cancer other than pain management?
Particularly, I'm not aware of that case.
So I think we'll close the session. That was the last. Thank you, sir, for your time. And I would personally like to thank everybody for patient listening, and thank you for the interactive questions also. Thank you. Sorry?
Yeah, are we still live? I want to thank the entire CCI family, and particularly Dr. Krishna and the CIPLA team for giving me this wonderful opportunity to present an interesting cases of orthopedics or relation between orthopedician and pulmonologist. It's very innovative kind of presentation which I have seen in my career. Thanks to all the team.
Thank you, sir. Yeah, I think Dr. Vijay has joined. Sir, are you live?
I'm not on live, right?
So shall we end the session then? Thank you everybody. Thank you, Dr. Krishna. Thank you to Dr. Narendra, Dr. Vijay, Dr. Ravi, Dr. Swapnil. Thank you everybody.